Thanks to everyone. Pat Mitchell, you are 1 in a million or a billion. Thank you for the way that you have just brought everything together. And the conversation, witnessing you and Carol in conversation was really just such an honor. As someone who also read your book and was so deeply influenced by it, and someone who's seen individuals essentially rebirth and renew themselves over and over, which is something that all of us have to do as this world is changing. I thank you both for that. And Dilip and Alex, it goes without saying, to see the two of you in the way that you are really creating fundamental shifts in the way that we see people, not just listen to them. And therefore create a world where they get to participate. It's really what we're all talking about. And so I want to thank you for traveling and being here to share those stories. I also want to thank you. I also want to thank every single one of you for coming. It's a fundamental value at Acumen to show up for one another. And on these rainy, miserable nights, showing up means even more. And so I just want to say thank you for being here. And as Pat said so eloquently before, all of the work that you see is because of you. All of the companies that we're able to build, now 117 across the world that have brought goods and services to 270 million people. All of the 556 fellows who are impacting millions of lives. The online university that Acumen has built that has already seen over 500,000 individuals take those courses. That's because of the support that you give financially and otherwise. And so I just want to say thank you to you. And then to the inimitable Acumen team for pulling all of this together, Carla and Zaira and Megan, all of the volunteers. I want to thank you as well. So just a moment of gratitude to start the evening. For Acumen, it starts by standing with the poor, always. And when I was listening to Carol and Pat speak, and frankly, every one of the stories tonight, what I couldn't help but think about was how critical that is, not only to everything that Acumen does, but when people in this moment of history will ask us about gender lens investing, which is really the new hot topic of the day. For me, it still starts by standing with the poor. Because if you listen radically to what Pat and Carol were talking about, that human voice, for me, is more this idea that, not that there's the male and the female, but that our systems for the last several hundred, if not 1,000 years, have really been designed in terms of separation. The for-profit and the non-profit sector, rich countries, poor countries, men, women, communism, capitalism. And increasingly, and certainly since the fall of the Berlin Wall, when we started to move into full-blown unbridled capitalism and the rise of technology, you saw this exacerbating force of individualism that separated us from each other, certainly from the community. You saw this idea that, I think, Pat, you said it, that if I can only win if you lose. We separate from each other. And so when I think about gender lens investing, or so many of the conversations that we're talking about in changing the paradigm, it's not how many more women are we supporting, although that matters. It's, are we building systems that don't simply identify success based on money or power or fame, but rather community, connection, service. And too often those are, as you said, Carol, they're too often connected to female and male rather than the Jungian notion of the feminine and masculine. And we need both desperately. And what Acumen has always represented is that fusion of head and heart, that we need to find individuals like Alex and Dilip who've got a deep empathy and moral imagination to see the world around it, the realities that exist, but to imagine with audacity the future that could be, and to pull it together with managerial capabilities and an empathy that insists on including the poor and the vulnerable. In other words, a definition of success based not simply on how the wealthy are treated, but on how the poor, the vulnerable, and future generations, therefore the earth, are treated and included. And that is the frame that increasingly I certainly see Acumen's work in investing in companies and in leaders and in spreading an ethos of moral leadership. And that's really what I want to talk about through just a few of the companies and the leaders that all of us have been so lucky to be supportive of. If you start by bringing all of the voices together and solving a problem, as has been said, we really do see incredible shifts. You take the problem of cook stoves. This woman is cooking on a cook stove that looks exactly like the cook stoves that I used to see around myself when I lived in Kenya and Rwanda in the 1980s. Literally billions of women cook on these every day, even today. They're dirty. They're fueled by firewood and charcoal, which is made from wood. 36% of all respiratory disease comes from inhaling indoor smoke. And in the rainy season and cold, there's no option but to cook inside. It also costs a lot of money, either to buy that charcoal or that wood in the city, or time if you have to go into the forest to find the wood every single day. And so it fully depreciates a woman's capability of participating in the economy. Enter an entrepreneur with moral imagination that recognizes that there's a better solution. If you start by seeing women as customers who want to make their own decisions, women who want dignity and choice and opportunity, then you can actually build a company that supports them. But Peter had another joy, which was the world, the environment. He was a tree hugger in every sense of the word. And when he made the connection that cook stoves were actually one of the main forces of deforestation, he decided he had no choice but to build a company that would manufacture and sell cook stoves. What he understood as well, that to get a company that, for just by virtue of who uses cook stoves, who your customers are, would be women, that he wanted to find a way to hire a manufacturing force that was at least 50% women. And I think it was you, Alex, that said it's one thing to give people a job, it's another thing to give people the confidence to actually live into that job and see themselves transform to have a career. And so we had to create a leadership program where you could identify those women who are actually, and men, who are actually starting to show themselves as leaders, and he uses some of the Acumen course materials. And the results have been extraordinary. Now as about 270 employees, 60% of whom women. One I met last Thursday named Vio, and I'll just let her speak for herself.
My name is Violet Mukaya. I've been working at BAN for the past 5 years and 9 months. Here, I started as a line worker. Currently, I'm working as a quality analyst, and that came all about through the program that we went, which was a leadership program which was sponsored by BAN Manufacturing. So this program was meant in a way that it can help me here at work, personally when I'm growing, and then maybe out there with other people. So other women that I work with that I'm really proud of, people that I'm looking up to at times, through this making stoves, they've already employed other people. They've already created jobs for other people out there, which is a very good thing. I'm so motivated on making a quality stove every morning when I come to work, simply because of what I've become at BAN. I came as no one, nobody, but right now I can put a smile on my face each and every day, and I've never regretted doing what I do currently. It has been a great inspiration for my mom, like her seeing me in different programs, seeing me with different certificates each and every day, makes her be motivated. I'm so proud of my contribution to the world and the environment.
I think that's something that we really underestimate too often, is how many people with just a little bit of access turn around and immediately give to others, stand as role models, bring them into the picture. And when you do this right, what's also so exciting, and Acumen has the stories to tell now, is the impact that you see on the ground. Bern today is selling 25,000 cook stoves per month, And Peter tells me that he could radically increase that number if only the mainstream financial system, even today, would provide more working capital. But the numbers are quite something, 3 million people served. Another issue that we think about, particularly right now as we're looking at jobs go away around the world, is the faces of the voiceless that are too often seen as one mass of people. And in a country like India, where you're seeing 15 to 20 million new job entrants every year looking for opportunities, as we're watching jobs go away, is really quite a stunning problem. Too often, our corporations see that mass of people more as inputs than as full human beings. Not so much another one of Acumen's entrepreneurs, a woman named Gayatri Vasuvadan, who from the very beginning wanted to work with low-income people, find a way to do workforce education, development, give them opportunity. But she started in more traditional ways, in a divided system, in government, in the nonprofit sector. And it took a while to recognize that it was only when you saw a convergence, only when she could actually work with corporations who were needing a better trained workforce, that she might have an opportunity to actually bring not just skills, but character development into low-income people. And so LaborNet was started with Acumen's support to train construction workers, women working in leather tanning industries, the invisibles, essentially, and giving them not just safety and rudimentary skills, but as I said before, critical thinking. And over time, she has been able to train over 700,000 individuals, and we've watched some of those individuals change their families, change their communities. But Gayatri didn't start a company again just to do one thing and move toward singular profitability. She also wants to contribute to creating jobs in India. And so she's seen as individuals start to recognize their own capabilities, the opportunity to enable some of them to become entrepreneurs. And thus far, LaborNet has given 7,000 individuals the chance to become entrepreneurs and start their own companies. Because what Gayatri has done is extend her social capital, her connection to corporations that then can provide contracts, whether it's for, in this case, school uniforms that are then made by Shilpa, who was a tailor who now employs 20 people. So those 7,000 individual entrepreneurs have now created 70,000 jobs, and Gayatri is just getting started. What this comes down to, and what has been reinforced over and over at Acumen over the last 18 years, is that if you really want to change a system, we can talk about spreadsheets and we can talk about projections, but what you need, and Alex, you talked about it beautifully, is character. You need entrepreneurs who not only have the vision for what is possible, but the humility to build a management team around them that can actually make things work. You need individuals who, by definition, are challenging a status quo, and therefore they have to fight bureaucracy, complacency, and corruption. They have to have the resilience to do this not for 2 or 3 years, but for 20 or 30 to change systems. And that is what we are also learning how to identify. But when you connect character to the right kind of capital, change is possible. As an impact investor, people often look at us and ask us what our blockbusters are. In our case, our biggest blockbuster was mentioned by Alex. It's a company called D-Light. It was actually started in 2006 by two graduates out of Stanford Business School, who even at the time had a dream not to become overnight billionaires like some of their classmates, but they wanted to eradicate kerosene. Kerosene is a fuel used by 1.5 billion individuals across the planet because they don't have access to electricity 140 years after Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Like Alex, who was crazed by the fact, which is interesting, 10 years later, 600 million, these two decided that they were going to take it on. The only problem was they had no idea how. They had a light and they had a dream, and they were able to be radical, truly radical listeners. We saw character in Ned and Sam, and we put the first investment dollars into them. None of us knew how hard it was going to be to build a sector when you're looking at people who make $1, $2, $3 a day, who are already using kerosene, where there's a status quo of kerosene mafias who do not want you to succeed, when there's no financing and there's no trust. So if I have something that I know at least works for me, why will I try a new technology? And yet, these guys persisted, and over time they built a sector, and they were able to build a company as well, which today is a $100 million revenue company that has, more importantly, brought light and electricity to more than 90 million individuals across the world. That is the definition of systems change. In addition to making change like that, Acumen has grown and learned with them. Over time, we've invested in 25 other off-grid companies like Easy Solar, Burn, mini-grids and microgrids at great risk, to the point where we became the largest off-grid energy investor in the world when it comes to low-income communities. But I want you to look at this graph, because between 2008, which was 2 years after they started the company, and 2013, we weren't sure if this company was going to make it or go bankrupt. Patient capital was needed because no traditional investors would go in. We needed philanthropy. This is where those of you who supported us enabled us to help build a company that would change a system that can then change the world. Patient, pioneering capital backed by philanthropy so that they could make all of the mistakes that they did in those first 5 years. It also enabled us to bring fellows into the work, to use our social capital to connect them to corporations and consultants that could help them understand the work they were doing. I just had coffee with an entrepreneur in Nairobi last week, and he was explaining to me why his financials were so bad. And he said, well, you know, it's my first 5 years of wandering around the desert. And I was like, are we still doing it that way? And the truth is, if you're building a new sector, you are. And we need that philanthropic-backed patient capital. But once you start to get up this J-curve, these companies are no longer raising rounds of $1 million that philanthropy can help them raise. They need to raise $50 million, because now you've got capital infusing so that they can actually reach not 100 million people, but as Sam told me, we're just getting started, Jacqueline. We're going to reach 500 million soon. And so we thought, well, obviously, the more traditional impact investors would want to invest in a company like D-Light. You've got a company at that point, $50 million in revenues, but it wasn't profitable then, like it is now. And so the impact investors weren't coming through. But Acumen, by that point, had a track record, credibility. And so we decided, well, we are here to solve problems. We are not here just to stick with the single tool that we started off when we developed. And so we started to think about capital along that spectrum: patient capital, early stage, philanthropic, to build companies, to go into places like Sierra Leone and enable it, Easy Solar, to have to make some of the same mistakes that D-Light made, because it's a different geography altogether. But once Easy Solar gets to a point where it's raising massive rounds of capital, which it will, we need to have that impact fund. And so Acumen went out into the market, and we raised a $70 million for-profit impact fund called Kawisafi, which is a couple of years old now, has invested in 5 companies. Those companies together have already brought electricity to 25 million people across Africa. The reason that number is 4 or 5 up there, 5, is because that number is for East Africa. Because we didn't start Kawisafi either only to build companies. We want to change systems. And we now believe, through the ecosystem that Acumen Fund has helped build, that through Acumen's work and Kawisafi's work, we can show governments that off-grid energy is a better, faster, less expensive way of bringing electricity to low-income rural populations than extending the grid. And then we can bring real electricity to those 600 million people that do not have it. And that is the way Acumen thinks about poverty and thinks about systems. We have to remove structural impediments. We have to enable low-income people to change their behavior. It takes time. But when they do, that is when they get their own dignity. That is when we get ours. But it also comes down to people at the end of the day. When you hear Dilip's story and when you hear Alex's story, when you see Sohani and the others, one of the things that Acumen has is not just the ability to raise philanthropy that then we can deploy as investment, that then we can support fellows with, but it's a network of individuals who have connections to institutions, to opportunities. Because when you look across particularly the continents in which we operate, those entrepreneurs that make the biggest difference often have the biggest networks themselves. And so it behooves all of us in this world of such inequality to think about ourselves and how we can also extend our social capital. And there is no bigger manifestation in Acumen's world than our 556 fellows that currently exist across a geographic footprint from Pakistan, India, East-West Africa, and Colombia. These fellows are extraordinary and they're doing incredible work, but it's about bringing a community together around them, not only to support one another, but to help them grow. And I just want to give you a couple of examples. This is Muhammad Ali, who is a Pakistani who lives in Karachi. Now, I first met Muhammad Ali about 6 years ago. He barely spoke English. His operation was about a $50,000 a year operation, and he was an extraordinary man because what he did was care about the truly invisibles, people that the world too often would rather see almost as throwaways. Muhammad Ali lived in one and worked in one of the most dangerous slums in Karachi, and he identified young people who were already kidnapped and moving through the human trafficking circuit. He had, as I said, no budget. He really had no technology, but he had this will and he had an inventiveness. He understood human networks. And what Muhammad Ali started to recognize was that if you wanted to be effective in stopping human trafficking, you had to know who was hanging around the bus stops because they would see the strangers coming through. And the people that in Pakistan, in the cities, in the slums that hang around the bus stops are the transgender community, which is a truly marginal community when we're thinking about this structure of status and who's on top. And what was so exciting to Muhammad Ali is when given the opportunity to contribute to their country, the transgender community stepped forward and gladly volunteered. They became his eyes, his ears, his hands. And Muhammad Ali soon became the most effective organization in the country at bringing back lost children. But it was a tiny operation. And so what Acumen was able to do was make it safe for philanthropists from Pakistan and across the world, including our own Shaiza Razavi, board chair, to go into Liari, to this slum, to meet with Muhammad Ali and the parents of children who had been restored to them, and to meet with the transgender community too and hear their stories of why, even though they have nothing, even though they are reviled in their country, they are so proud to be Pakistanis and so proud to have the chance to give what they can give. That the philanthropists were deeply moved and they made a commitment on the spot to take all of his fundraising burden off him for the next 3 years, expand his budget and build a safe house, not only for the children but for the transgender community to come together in. Now, Muhammad Ali has a relationship with the local police who see him as legitimate, and they have massively increased their effectiveness. And just a couple of days ago, I got an email from one of our Pakistani partners who told me that his policies and his ways of seeing the finding of children are sitting at the Prime Minister's desk. That's how we use our capital and our social capital, our community, to create the kind of change that shifts paradigms and brings the voiceless and the unseen into our lives and makes all of us richer. Another way that we can extend our social capital is through platforms. And our own Pat Mitchell, board member, was the one who pushed me, why aren't we putting any of the fellows on the TED stage? And so hosted a TED Women and invited Ashwita Shetty, who gave an incredible TED Talk, along with other amazing Acumen fellows. But Ashwita is a young woman from a far-flung village in India. And she starts her TED Talk by saying, all my life I've had to fight 3 identities: poor, village, girl. And her mother was a beady roller, illiterate, and had expectations that her daughter would follow suit in many ways. And so from a very young age, she had that resilience, that toughness, that courage to say, I am getting out of here. And somehow or another, she got herself into a university through a fellowship and a scholarship, and then she came back to the village because right now she is determined that she will dedicate her life not only to providing education, but to providing the confidence that young people who've been told they're worthless their whole life need to have if they're going to make change. And because of, again, this fellowship program, she's not thinking about a tiny scale operation. She wants to develop the skills, the tools, the attributes, and the community around her to shift the paradigm. That's the promise of using our financial capital, our social capital, to reach not just these 556, but the millions that they have the capability to touch. And then we started to see that there were young people all around the world that wanted in. They wanted to be part of this conversation. They wanted to be fellows. And we couldn't make them all fellows overnight, so we started to put our tools, our courses online to see who showed up. And as I said at the beginning, so far we've seen over 500,000 people take courses from 192 countries. There is a hunger in our world to be connected to something bigger than ourselves, to know each other, to have community, to heal the rifts that we all are experiencing. And so Plus Acumen has played a vital role in creating infrastructure to enable us to do that. And so today, in 2019, as we look at this world of such great inequality, where we fear climate change, where we're wondering, how are these divides ever going to be healed? We've decided in September at our board meeting that it is to Acumen to take all of this, our companies, our leaders, our ideas, and move it forward into a new entity or a new division within Acumen that we're calling Acumen Academy. It's an integrated model, blended model, where we'll use the best of online and the best of what we've been able to build in countries like India, Pakistan, East, West Africa, Colombia. And we will expand geographically over the next 18 months into Malaysia, Bangladesh, the UK, and Spain, because they see themselves as having so many of these same issues. In each of those geographies, we will identify cohorts every year of 20 or more individuals across race, class, ethnicity, religion, ideology. And we will build cohorts and communities. We will connect them through communities of practice through this online platform. But meantime, we will create a university for the world that all people can have access to, so that we can then find the best innovation wherever it may be and pull it toward us, and remind people who are the change makers, not only are they not alone, but that they need a different set of tools. They need to integrate the head and the heart, the hard and the soft, to create the kind of world in which all of us are included. That's at the heart of everything that Acumen does. That's what tonight has been about. The shifting of paradigms is essentially this recognition that a world of unbridled capitalism, we know that doesn't work. A world where we are only looking at shareholders and not stakeholders, we know doesn't work. But what we need are role models of success that is driven by purpose and community. We need to show people that this is what success looks like. It's the Dillips, it's the Alexes, it's the Carols, it's the Pats. We need to show models of inclusive capitalism, not just say that capitalism doesn't work or it has to change. We know it has to change, but we now have dozens of models. And we need to take the skills and the tools of those models and we need to share them with the world. And most importantly, we need to share an ethos that is embedded in the Acumen Manifesto, that money is just money. We need to understand how to use investment as a means, not think about it as the end in itself. We need to take capital and control it, but not let it control us. We need to learn to fight the bureaucracy and the corruption and the complacency. And most important, we need to spread hope, because there's nothing more radical you can do in a cynical time than do that, because hope itself is a responsibility. And so shifting the paradigm whether you're talking about gender lens or whether you're just talking about poverty, lack of choice, lack of opportunity, presence of dignity. If I've learned anything in my life and in the work that we do at Acumen, it is that we don't get dignity as a human race until all of us get dignity. And all of us won't have dignity if we only work with one side of ourselves. All of us have to have the courage to integrate the head and the heart. Power, most importantly, with love. And that's what so many of you are doing every single day in your lives. That's the work that's the gift that you give Acumen by standing with us so that we can stand with the poor. And from the bottom of my heart, I want to just say, end where I started, with gratitude and with hope, because I share yours. Thank you.